Hi, my name's Amanda Wilkins, and I'm the coordinator of Gifted and Talented Education here in DD2. Thanks for stopping by to find out more about our program and how we can help support your child. A few of the common questions we get asked are: how do students qualify for GATE classes and services? What does the qualification process look like? What do my child's scores mean? What's the difference between state identified and locally placed? And how are students served in GATE in DD2? Well, let's first start talking about what is GATE. GATE stands for Gifted and Talented Education. In South Carolina, gifted and talented students are those identified with specific criteria demonstrating high performance ability or potential in academic and artistic areas, requiring an educational program beyond the general curriculum to achieve their potential. These students are then served in grades 3 through 12. I particularly deal with academic gifted, whereas artistically gifted students go through Jason Walsh in the Fine Arts Department. Common misconceptions about gifted learners are that gifted students are all self-motivated, gifted students are all good test takers, gifted students are gifted in all areas. If a student struggles, they are not gifted. Gifted students are all emotionally stable and mature. Gifted students do not have learning disabilities. And gifted students are all well behaved. We have to realize that students from all different areas qualify based on their skills and potential, not on their actions. The area that gets the most questions would be state identified versus locally placed. The State Department has a specific rubric that we will go through to qualify students for gifted services. Once state identified, think about it as a special education. There are specific services required for that identification. That student, once identified, remains identified throughout their entire career of school. For instance, if your child was identified in second grade based on assessment data required by the rubric, that student will remain state identified and in GATE and honors classes all the way through high school and graduation. Locally placed, however, is looking at numbers of the classroom. So if numbers permit, students are then placed into gifted classes in hopes to support them in meeting that state identification. We do have a local placement worksheet created by Testing and Accountability alongside my department that really just takes students' scores and places them and gives them a ranking in order to have fair locally placed students. Remember, from school to school, the numbers are going to vary. So services are not guaranteed from year to year or school to school. If your student is starting in one elementary school and locally placed and you move halfway through the school year, there could be, for instance, that student needing to go back into core classes because the GATE numbers at the new school do not permit your student going in. Same thing year to year. As we have more and more students come into our district, we can't guarantee local placement from year to year. The only way to be guaranteed would be to be state identified. Remember that gifted and talented state identification, it is a service, not a status. This is how we can better serve these students, and once identified, we ensure that they are getting the proper education that they need to meet their needs. South Carolina is a state that determines gifted placement statewide, not through each district. This is the exact gifted and talented identification process rubric mandated by the State Department. There is Dimension A, Dimension B, and Dimension C to consider. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, you can see there are several ways for a student to qualify. Dimensions A plus B would be meeting the qualifying scores in Dimension A, which is cognitive thinking, Dimension B, which is academic skills, or Dimension A plus Dimension C, or Dimension B plus Dimension C. So as you can see, you have to be partially qualified in either A or B to be considered for C. C is an assessment given in elementary school that you have to qualify for. And C in middle school is your GPA, needing to be at least a 3.75. There is one dimension you can qualify in alone, which is Dimension A on our cognitive abilities assessment. If you are in the 96th percentile or above for your total score, there you will automatically qualify as what we call a 96er, and you will be automatically state identified for gifted and talented. The big red X on the side is to remind us that the State Department does not take recommendations. So whether you're a parent or teacher who really believes a student should be in gifted and talented education and receiving those services, that is not part of the consideration here in South Carolina for our identification process. In our district, the timeline spans all the way through high school. So we're looking at early identification. This would mean pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. And then when they get to grade 2, this is when we start the universal screening. So parents, if you hear about the COGAT, the Cognitive Abilities Assessment, or the Iowa or MAP testing, all of those things in grade 2 start counting as towards their placement. Earlier than that, we're looking at really teachers just kind of identifying high test scores, strong motivation and potential, and working with me, with district staff to help support those students prepare for grade 2. Once students test in grade 2, then we begin placement for grade 3. So the earliest you can be served in Dorchester 2 for gifted and talented education is going to be grade 3. This is when the students are placed, and this is when your student might even be locally placed depending on numbers. Grades 3 through 10, we continue testing and placement all the way through high school. So you'll notice a lot of times parents will think, well, my student didn't make gifted and talented in second grade, that's it. And it looks nothing like that. It's a fluid process. We're continuously testing, starting from the first week of school with MAP testing, moving into fall abilities testing, which we'll get into. We also do MAP testing in the winter, in the spring. We do SC Ready testing, and even the SCPTA if students qualify. So all those I will discuss, but there are many opportunities throughout each year for students to then qualify for gifted services. As we discussed, each grade comes with different opportunities. And in second grade, you've got the Iowa, the COGAT, the MAP assessment, and potentially the SCPTA. In grades 3 through 5, you have these same opportunities. And moving into middle school, you'll have MAP assessment, fall abilities, SC Ready, and GPA here. Newly enrolled students, and if you're looking at the states listed here on our presentation slide, these are the states that we actually have reciprocity with. So if you're coming in new from a different state to DD2, welcome. And if it's from one of those states where your student has been served in gifted education, the reciprocity will allow your student to be identified here as a gifted student, just because those are states that also have a state rubric and don't allow district discrepancies. First, we're going to take a look at the second grade universal screening assessments. So we've got the COGAT, the Iowa, and the MAP. These are assessments that I'll break down so you understand what each entail and really how to help prep your child for these assessments. The Cognitive Abilities Assessment is assessment created by Riverside Insights, and it's an amazing way to test students' skills outside of your typical black and white academic achievement tests. In this test, you're going to have 3 batteries: verbal, quantitative, and nonverbal. The verbal assessment is really a lot of patterns, word patterns, and recognition. And it's really all these assessments, batteries are a lot of out of the box thinking. But the biggest thing you're looking for would be patterns and kind of puzzles. Quantitative is going to align mostly with your math, And nonverbal, this is the only assessment we give in DD2 that addresses the nonverbal. It's that visual spatial reasoning. So making shapes out of things and paper folding, really that out of the box, big picture type thinking skills. Now, this is in Dimension A, this assessment, because it focuses on the cognitive abilities. So if your student partially qualified or fully qualified in Dimension A, that is with this out of the box style thinking assessment, so you know what Dimension A means. This is given in the fall, and we give it to all second graders. And after that, there is a sign up each year. Your child may sign up to take the fall abilities assessment to see if their score improves. As a parent, I do recommend having your child sign up for the fall abilities assessment each and every year, simply because the more students become accustomed to these types of questions, the better they do. So we tend to see that historical growth on this assessment year after year after year. Also, as a parent, even if your student's not interested in GATE or not a qualifier, this is still a great data point for you as a parent to know your child's learning strengths. If you are in the 93rd percentile in just one of these batteries, so verbal, quantitative, or nonverbal, you become partially qualified for gifted services, and that will stick for 5 years. So let's say in second grade, you take this assessment and you score in the 93rd percentile for verbal. If so, you have 5 years from then to meet another requirement to become fully state identified. Another reminder that on this assessment, while there's the verbal, quantitative, and nonverbal, there's also the total or composite score. And if your child scores the 96th percentile or above for the composite, you're automatically state identified. Now, all that being said, just for fun, we're going to look at some examples of possible cognitive abilities assessment questions. In the verbal, you're going to look at analogies, okay? And so in this one, we're looking at clumsy is to botch as blank is to blank. Now, this is a really tricky question because it requires that really intimate, in-depth knowledge of vocabulary. The answer, if you're wondering, to the first one is 5. Lazy is to shirk. If you're clumsy, you might botch a job, and if you're lazy, you might brush something off. Now in quantitative, we're looking for patterns. So here, we're looking for what number is the car sitting in, and what pattern does your brain make to figure out that number. In this particular problem, the answer to the spot is number 62. There are multiple ways students can come at this, and I've asked a live audience how they came to that answer, and it's really funny to see that there are maybe 10 different ways that they decided to answer that question. But that's the point. In Gifted and Talented, we don't really do black and white, there's one correct answer. We do really start to study how there are multiple viewpoints and multiple ways to solve a problem, and then analyze all those ways to determine which is best. So quantitative is really great for students who do see patterns naturally and are quick to solve things. Now, nonverbal, again, this is the paper folding. So when you look at the top left corner, you're going to see a full piece of green paper. And then you're going to see it's folded diagonally in half, and then again, and a hole is punched in it with a paper cutter. Now, when you open that piece of paper back up, what pattern will you see? Now, this is tricky for a lot of people, including adults. And a lot of times people have to actually fold the paper in front of them and pretend to cut to actually visualize it. But if your child is great at visualizing outcomes, this would be a great section to really help amp up the skills in the nonverbal. The answer for this one, by the way, is B. Now we're going to take a look at a GIFT profile. GIFT is the system that South Carolina uses for really keeping records of our gifted students, although there is a gift profile for most all students in the district, grades 2 and up. So here you have a student, and you can see in Dimension A, there's a total category with your composite score. And then, of course, you've got the nonverbal, the quantitative, and the verbal scores. And here, all the students' scores will be shown, and year after year, they all stay on there. So you can start to see a trend with that student information, which is why, again, I do push for families to sign up for Fall Abilities. It's completely free. The school does it. But just by signing your child up, you'll start to see that area of growth. And sometimes a particular area will stand out. So this is a really great information tool, not only for teachers, but for parents. Now, Dimension A, that test we just discussed, and it shows right there, it's valid for 5 years. So this is something to remember and consider. And then again, if they're in the 96th percentile for the total, then that student will be automatically identified. All right, so we're going to check for understanding. Can students become state identified gifted with their COGAT scores alone? That's Dimension A alone. The answer is yes. If your student scores in the 96th percentile, not on one of the batteries, but as the composite score, then yes, your student will be considered state identified gifted. What happens when students meet the qualifying score in just one dimension? That's when students become partially identified. So if your student did, let's say, got a 93rd percentile on the verbal battery of the COGAT, then your child will be considered partially identified, which is wonderful because on the local placement worksheet, those students go up to the top. And so you just want to keep pushing to support in other areas if we need, to really support them in getting identified. Remember, a lot of times students just don't get identified because they're not familiar with the assessment, and they're not familiar or maybe not really motivated on a test like a MAP test, for instance. And so this is when we really want to make sure, as parents, families, support systems, teachers, that we are exposing students to these types of questions and really help and encourage them to practice daily, because that will help your student get identified if they should be. Now, according to the State Department, the cognitive abilities assessment can only be taken once a year. And so what we do is, besides our universal screener, that is going to miss some students, because obviously we have students coming into our system after the second grade year, etc. So we offer the Fall Abilities, which is just an opportunity for students in grades 3 through 8 to take this assessment in the fall. You should sign your child up if they are not state identified, because there's no need to take this assessment if they are. And if your child is not currently partially qualified in Dimension A. So for instance, let's say that in 3rd grade, your child took the cognitive abilities assessment and partially qualified with the nonverbal battery. We do not need to sign that child up for Fall Abilities again, because you've already met that for 5 years. So really we're looking for students who have no qualification or maybe partial qualification in Dimension B to sign up for this. So how to sign up? Well, this is through Parent Portal. The announcement comes out pretty quickly after registration in the fall. So you'll start to see it probably early September, and registration ends. It goes through October, and students test usually the week of November 10th, roughly. Each year it varies a little, but that would be, they test at their home school. We just need a parent to go in Parent Portal, click on the Forms tab, and then your student is signed up. Once you find that form and fill it out, it's really quick. And then you have some valuable data points there. Now, Dimension B focuses on your academic achievement. So we're looking at scores on assessments like MAP and SC Ready. MAP will be used 2nd grade through 8th grade. And remember, in Dimension A, it's the 93rd percentile in one of the batteries. In Dimension B, it's the 94th 94th percentile in either math or reading. And so the thing about MAP is oftentimes, as a parent, you get a report sent home that looks kind of like this that you'll see below and on the side here. And you don't really know what those numbers mean. Well, for gate identification, we do use the national percentile rank. So we're looking at the NPR. And on this little chart over here, you might get and see all these numbers and not really know what they mean. Well, the arrow is pointing to a bolded number in the middle of the percentile rank and not the RIT score. We're not looking at RIT, we're looking at percentile. And so you can see that the arrow is pointing to a score that has not met qualification. Now, this particular child did meet qualification status to be partially qualified in the fall of 2023 with a 94th percentile. That score is valid for 2 years. So let's say from the fall of 23 to this fall of 25, the student did not meet identification in either dimension A or C. Then starting with winter 2025, the student would start over and that 94 would get erased. So this lasts for only 2 years while dimension A lasts for 5. The map is given in the fall, winter, and spring. And so there are really 6 opportunities when you look at both reading and math throughout each school year, starting in grade 2, for students to qualify for services. Now, the SE Ready is also part of Dimension B, and it's given to students grades 3 through 8 in the spring. Take it once a year. And again, just like MAP, we're looking at either math or reading. Now, the difference between our MAP assessment and SE Ready is that each year, the State Department puts out a percentile for SE Ready. So for instance, this particular student, you can see on their top SE Ready score where the arrow is pointing, earned a 706 in reading. Well, if you look at the chart provided by the state for 2023, that child's in grade 4, and they just made the cut, earning that 706. So this is a question I get from a lot of parents. Why did my child get exceeds on the SE Ready in reading and math, and they're not in GATE? Well, because it's not about making the exceeds, it's about meeting that cut percentile score given by the state. So that's really the tricky piece as far as a parent and understanding why your child would not be in gifted services when they're showing great academic achievement. Now, the Iowa assessment is given to second graders only. It's given in conjunction with our cognitive abilities just to give them an assessment from both dimensions in hopes that students can get identified early on. We're also looking here at national percentile rank, and this given with second graders with the cognitive abilities assessment is given in the fall of their second grade year, and they do have to show that they're in the 94th percentile. We're also, as I'm looking at this, we're not looking at vocabulary, just reading and mathematics. So if they did happen to score a 94th percentile in vocabulary, we are not, that is not part of the state rubric, just the reading and the math. All right, we're going to check for understanding here. Can students become state identified gifted with their Dimension B scores alone? The answer is no. A student has to score B plus A or C in order to get state identified. Remember, gifted is just beyond how well a student does on an assessment. And even though the cognitive abilities assessment is a test, it is very different than your typical academic test. That's a thing we hear a lot from parents is, but my student's a bad test taker. That would really affect Dimension B more than anything because Dimension A is just such a different assessment. And, we're really looking at their out-of-the-box thinking there and processing skills. What happens when a student scores above the 94th percentile in both reading and math? Well, I guess they're a unicorn because that's very rare and that's amazing if they do, but it does not affect the partial qualification. They really just need one area, but if they do 2, I guess that's a bonus. All right, so here we're looking about how a student can go from partially identified or qualified to state identified. And so here, if you look under the light bulb, you can see like a student, for example, who's partially qualified in Dimension A. Let's say your child got in the 94th percentile for quantitative battery on the cognitive abilities assessment. Well, within those 5 years, in order to become state identified, your student would have to partially qualify in Dimension B, so meet that 94th percentile cut score on either the SC Ready or the MAP assessment, or you would meet requirements on the SCPTA in elementary school or the GPA for middle school. And we'll talk more about those as well. If your student is partially qualified in Dimension B, so we're looking at in the 94th percentile on one of the areas of SC Ready or MAP assessment, then your child would either within 2 years have to partially qualify in Dimension A, which is your cognitive abilities assessment, or again, meet the requirements for the SCPTA in elementary or GPA for middle. Now, I'm talking a lot about the SCPTA and the GPA. I want to break those down a little for you to help you better understand what those mean. So the SCPTA is the Performance Task Assessment. And each year, in order to qualify for this, the students have to be partially identified according to Dimension A or B. In this assessment, there's a verbal and a nonverbal battery. And students grades 2 through 5 will be able to take this. It is broken into chunks, so second and third graders take the primary, and fourth and fifth graders take the intermediate assessment. And both of these really are just based on certain cut scores given by the State Department. So the one thing that makes this assessment really stand out and help students qualify is that it is great for your visual learners. The teachers model a performance task. Let's say it could be analogies or building or patterns, but the teachers model it and then give the students their own similar problem that they have to a certain time period to answer independently. So for those who are really visual learners who like to see it being done first, this assessment really helps those students. In middle school, we're looking at a GPA of at least a 3.75. So we're looking at core classes, math, ELA, science, and social studies. You have to have at least 3 A's and a B on your final report card. Now, rising sixth graders, we do look at the fifth grade stored final end of the year report card. And again, it must be at least a 3.75 with your core subjects in order to then qualify in Dimension C. All right, so we're going to check for understanding about Dimension C. Can students become state identified gifted with their Dimension C scores alone? No, they cannot. They have to be state identified with C plus A or C plus B. When can Dimension C be considered for identification? Again, like I just said, you have to be partially identified in order for GPA or that PTA to be considered. So if you're a parent of a student in elementary and you said, well, another neighbor's doing additional gait testing, how is that so? Well, remember, you have to be invited to take the SCPTA in the spring, that gifted assessment, because you have to be partially identified. So if your child's not partially identified, they will not be taking that assessment. I mentioned this earlier, but in our department, we talk about this a lot. The GATE is a service. It is not a status. So really, gifted education falls under the umbrella of special education. And we are really trying to help identify those who really either have the potential or who are, needing specific services here. This is an example. This is, you might see a gifted classroom, but what you don't see is what lies underneath. It is important to remember that a gifted classroom can be just this heterogeneous. We have students who qualify For instance, with their cognitive ability skills, the 96er who's just an out of the box thinker, but might struggle academically. We have students who are really strong verbal students, and they met with qualifying scores on both their verbal portion of the cognitive abilities and their ELA MAP assessment. And so while they are very strong in ELA, they might need that math support. And then, of course, vice versa. You've got kids who qualify with the SCPTA, that modeling, visual support. And then you have others who are just really hard workers and make it in with their GPA in middle school. So an important thing to remember is that not all gifted students are the same. Your classrooms are extremely diverse and have so much, talent in there in all different areas. So one of the best things you can do as a parent to help support your learner is to really tap into that potential and start, kind of questioning and making them think and getting them prepared for these assessments that could help them with a service that they really need. So DD2 serves our gifted students through what's called a whole class model. And there are some districts, even in South Carolina, who do what's called a pull-out model, where they're pulled out of a class separately from their peers, and they work on different problem solving and thinking skills. However, in our district, we serve whole class models. So for instance, if your student becomes state identified gifted at the end of fifth grade, with their GPA, what does middle school look like for them? Well, it's different than elementary. In elementary, we serve in a GATE class, and that class focuses on gifted instruction in ELA and in math. The same teacher. In middle school, as they move into gifted, we're looking at 4 core subjects, which is ELA, math, science, and social studies, that are all gifted. And while they tend to rotate with a core crew of students throughout the day, they could have different students in their classes, but they're all focusing on that gifted curriculum for all 4 subjects. We look at enrichment materials and strategies. We look at depth over acceleration. Sometimes we hear acceleration and it sounds good, like, my child is in 3rd grade reading at a 5th grade level. And that's so wonderful. But the problem is sometimes with acceleration is you just skim the surface. And so in DD2, we're really focused on the depth and really digging into our standards and really just kind of exploring and creating with those at the highest level we can. We do provide social emotional support for our gifted learners. A lot of times, if you are a gifted learner, you have a student who is, it's kind of coupled with anxiety or a lot of self-pressure. And so, we do have a lot of systems in place to support our gifted learners. We do a lot of cross-curricular planning. We work for projects based and pulling in different standards. We have ongoing screeners for these students. And our teachers are all endorsed all the way through high school. Our honors teachers are endorsed with the Gifted and Talented endorsement, meaning they have taken college credit classes and earned their endorsement. So they are specially qualified to be teaching these students. And then, of course, our higher order thinking, problem solving, and questioning skills are reinforced daily for these students. A question I get asked a lot is, what can I do at home? I'm actually a parent of 2 gifted learners who are currently students in this district. And it's tricky as a parent because all learners, as I mentioned before, are so different. My 2 are complete opposite. One excels in math, one excels in reading. One is very self-motivated, one could care less. And as a parent, you're just going, how can I foster this and support you in your educational growth? Well, starting even from when they're teeny tiny, make sure you're asking open-ended questions, because it doesn't matter if they're little or if they're in high school. But when you ask a question like, how was your day? And what do they say? Good, fine. So you want to ask questions that will kind of stop those one-word answers, even if it's how was your day and why? Why was it fine? Follow up with that. Or, tell me about something that made your day great or stressful, etc. Another thing is to have your child formulate their own questions. A lot of times we kind of, step in. We don't mean to, but we want to support them. But really having them propose questions about something is very important. And it can be anything. But really having them propose follow-up questions or questions for you or questions about something and having them explain their thinking. So, if they say my favorite color is green, why? Why is it green? Tell me about it. So really just keep prompting your students to think, to talk, because sometimes they'll say my favorite color is green, and it's really because someone in their class likes green and they don't actually really know what their favorite color is, and they just answer quickly rather than thinking through the process of maybe it's actually not green, maybe it's more green, blue, like teal, and then you have that conversation. Foster independence. So productive struggles good through chores at home, through thinking. We all have that image of the kid crying at the table doing math homework. But, one of the things I like to tell parents and families and teachers is that some of the things that I am the most proud of, I've also probably cried through or grappled through, whether it was a really tough hike or a college class or something that in that moment was so tough. But when I found a way to persevere, it is something I put on my list as my biggest accomplishment. Encourage questions and exploration rather than giving answers. And so I joke about this all the time, when I tell my son, hey, we have this luggage, can you put it in the trunk? And he's like, I can't make it work. Well, what do you want to do as a parent? You just want to go in and rearrange it and stick it in there and close the trunk. Or same thing with maybe the dishwasher, right? And so these are the things that we can pause and have our students think through and grapple with and try rather than just doing it for them. And then finally, it's just fostering resilience, because a lot of these challenges that are building character, that are building thinking skills are tough, and they make students want to shut down, but they're so rewarding. So really just that resilience of, I didn't get it right the first time, but I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm going to keep going and I'm going to do it even better the next time. Finally, we do have some question starters if you're kind of stumped on how to really challenge your student, that focus on evidence, perspective, hypotheticals, reasoning, problem solving, and metacognition, which is thinking about thinking. These are the things that the gifted and talented teachers challenge the students with daily. So if your student's at home and you want to challenge them a little bit, go ahead and ask, how do you know that? Prove it. Where's your evidence? So really making sure they're not making a broad statement, but they have evidence to support their reasoning. What's another way to look at that? In gifted classes, we often focus on perspective and multiple perspectives rather than just one viewpoint. What would happen if blank? So give a hypothetical situation and let them kind of think through the possibilities of that. Why did you choose X over Y? And this could be something as simple as, my daughter has a little blankie that she sleeps with. Why did you choose the blankie with flowers over the blue one? And have them talk through it. So that's my 3-year-old, by the way. But if you really push your student, no matter what age, to think through their choices, that's going to really benefit them, and no matter what class they're in the long run. How could you improve this? How can we improve this? This problem solving takes a normal problem, could be anything. Students waking up late, a high schooler constantly waking up late. How can we solve this? Let's talk through it together. Be part of that solution. And what did you learn from that? So our metacognition, our thinking about our thinking, what we're learning through each scenario. And if all else fails, Kogat.com, this is our Riverside site that has specifics about this assessment has a really great parent section that helps foster conversations for the dinner table, games you should be playing at home, what you can be doing to support your learner. And really, there are even cognitive ability sample questions out there. You just can Google them, but they're really fun to do as a family. They're really interesting to see how your student thinks and practice those analogies, patterns, and problem solving skills. We've talked through a lot today, and I really hope that you got something from this. If you have any questions for me or comments or suggestions, I am A.M. Wilkins at dorchester2.k12.sc.us, and my extension at work is 62003. I have had parents reach out to ask more about students coming in from out of state and what that looks like for them, students coming from private schools. I have parents reach out and say, you know, that gift profile you talked about, can I see what my kids looks like? I can send you a PDF of that. So really, it's just using me for support, but I have a whole team, and our teachers in DD2 are amazing and constantly growing and learning to support your students. And that's not even just third grade on. We're talking about like pre-third grade, teachers really supporting students who are excelling in one area or the other or showing potential. And so we're really proud to have them on our team. And whether you're a part of DD2 or thinking about it or joining us soon, please know that the curriculum and instruction team is here to support you and help serve your child the best way to be served. Thank you.